We're happy to be joined by two lead organizers of the Alphabet Workers Union, Parul Koul, the executive chair, and Chewy Shaw, the vice chair. Thanks for joining us on Breakthrough.
Thanks for having us.
So I feel for a lot of Americans in this day and age of record low union membership, the thought of unions and labor organizing conjures up images of like 20th century construction workers or factory laborers on the picket line. I can imagine that some folks seeing this news on this union effort at Google might think, well, why do relatively well-paid tech workers need a union? Parul, can you answer to some of that?
That's a great question, Monica. And I think there's two really important points here. The first is that tech workers have been organizing for a long time already without a union. They've been making far-reaching demands to improve their own workplaces and also with regards to how their work is used in the world outside. And they've done some really important activism around this. And a union is really just a more formal structure that's going to allow us to continue that work and sustain it in the long term. But I think the other really key point, and something that a lot of people may not know, is that the tech industry really has a two-tiered system. It has a segregated labor force where a huge number of the employees that work for big tech companies, including Google and others, are really contractors who are not directly employed by these big tech companies themselves, but are really hired by third parties. A lot of these workers tend to be Black and brown and relatively low wage and don't have access to the same kind of benefits that a lot of full-time staff have. And a lot of this stuff is information that, we know anecdotally and from working and being at our offices, but this is data that hasn't actually been released. For these workers, some of those bread and butter issues that you talked about earlier are still a reality that they need to fight for.
Now, so some of that, as you alluded to, this long history of organizing efforts in the tech industry and at Google itself. Chewy, can you summarize the years of organizing efforts at Google and all the work that went into starting this union effort and highlight some of the hurdles that you faced?
Well, I think part of it also kind of depends on what you consider to be the start of organizing, because to an extent, there's been people who've been doing a lot of organizing work since pretty much the beginning of Google. It's been very central with the way that the company started to really encourage people to speak up and to stand out. That's something that we've felt has really changed a lot in the past few years, where rather than encouraging people to really speak up and speak out when they believe that a decision is being made that is ignoring the ways it harms certain groups of people. Nowadays, we are seeing people who speak up start getting driven out of the company. In some cases, directly fired for doing so. And with that, it really hit a point for us where the structures that we have are not really protecting the workers who are really speaking up for those who need it. And so we found that at this point, we needed to really start coming together and figure out if there's a structure that we could build. And so from the women's walkout, that was a big moment for a number of us, because that was when we had a large number of employees all come together, make it clear that we wanted change to happen, only to see most of our demands ignored. And then having the Thanksgiving 4 firings, along with the firing that continued that the next month, just was another example of the executives just focusing on ways of silencing the problem rather than actually addressing it. And so for us, it really became the time when we needed to start figuring out how we can do this. And we started working with the CWA. We began working with them because they really stepped up and reached out. They helped a lot with the employees who got fired a year ago, and they're still helping with those cases. And since then, they've been working alongside us, really making it clear that they see this as a worker-driven project.
Now, reading your op-ed that both of you penned in the New York Times, I was really struck by the unity this effort is seeming to bring, as membership is not exclusively available to just tech workers and full-time employees. Parul, can you discuss why you think it's so critical that every Alphabet worker is represented in this union?
Yeah, Monica. I mean, I think one of the things that makes this effort so unique is that it's probably the first time that such a wall to wall union has been formulated in tech. And I think this is important because, like I mentioned, we have this two-tier segregated workforce. We have the reality that a lot of the marginalization faced by employees in our workforce isn't faced directly by people who are employed by these large tech companies. And we didn't want to be an organization of rich, wealthy tech workers who are kind of like banding together for themselves and asking for their lives to be better, which, is I think, valuable in and of itself in some ways, but really not the point of what we're trying to do with our organization. We're trying to use the relative power and privilege that we have as workers in our workplace and use that position to really extend and apply to all marginalized people that work for these companies and in the tech industry more broadly.
For sure, that unity is so critical. Another thing that I found really interesting in your op-ed was how you spoke against the argument that the tech industry will become less innovative if its workers are unionized. Can you expand on this, Chewy?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the interesting things about the concept of unionizing and organizing really at its core is really just getting people together so that they can work towards shared goals as one. And that, to an extent, is core to what the organization of Alphabet is as well doing. And they've been organizing labor to try to move us in a direction that represents this company. What we're trying to do is we're trying to then add the values to that and make it really be something where it is values driven for how these decisions get made. And so what we see then is that this really fits into helping to create more stronger organizational structure for the company that allows for us to actually prepare for it and deal with more complicated situations rather than, just responding to them as media nightmares, like the execs often tend to do with these things blowing up in their face rather than addressing them beforehand. And so through us kind of really working and getting a lot of minds onto these complex problems, we believe that we can actually come up with better solutions than a handful of people who are overworked will end up coming up with on the executive team. And with those better solutions, then we can end up making the tech much more efficient and much more available to a lot more people.
And I can imagine that treating workers with real dignity and respect is a lot more in line with Google's tagline of "don't do evil" or whatever than totally mistreating and firing workers for trying to organize for better conditions. One last question. The essential worker has become a popular term to describe the everyday workers keeping our society running, and that's something that the pandemic has exposed so blankly, who the real essential workers are. And we see that the most essential workers are not treated as essential at all. And also in this time of historic levels of economic inequality, a financial crisis we've yet to even see the worst of. How has this context impacted your organizing? I'll put this to you, Parul.
Thanks, Monica. I personally have the view that organizing the tech industry is really, really imperative for some of these reasons. Like you said, essential workers are not treated as essential at all by the society. We see who the most well-paid, I guess, well respected within the system. We see which workers those attributes are given to, and this really, I think, spells a trend for what we're going to see in the future. We're going to see more jobs automated away. We're going to see more jobs lost by the tech industry. We're really going to see this industry drive that income inequality and that inequality of access that is so stark right now because of the pandemic. That's only going to become worse, and a lot of that is going to be driven by the work of the tech industry and already has been driven by the tech industry. And so organizing the workers in that industry, really bringing workers to a point where they see themselves in solidarity with the rest of the working class, and are able to kind of bring that ethos into their organizing and their demands, is, I think, really critical for the future of the economy and like labor everywhere in the world.